Welcome in, everyone. We have a genuinely fascinating text in front of us today for this deep dive.
We really do.
Yeah. And if you're joining us, you likely already have a pretty solid foundation in how evolutionary biology intersects with human behavior.
Mhm.
You're probably looking for that next layer of insight.
Right, that deeper level.
Exactly, that kind of rigorous paradigm-shifting perspective that, well, forces you to reevaluate the foundational structures of society.
And that is exactly our mission today.
It is. We are focusing our lens entirely on the Turkish edition of Matt Ridley's book, The Origins of Virtue,
Right.
or published under the title Erdemin Kokunleri.
Erdemin Kokunleri, yes.
Right. And this specific volume, it was translated by Erhun Yurtasoy.
A really excellent translation, too.
Yeah, and brought to press by YKY, which is Yapı Kredi Yayınları.
Yapı Kredi Yayınları.
Thanks. I want to make sure I get that right. But it's a text that doesn't just ask questions about human nature. It actively attempts to dismantle our most comforting assumptions.
It really tears them down.
Yeah, assumptions about why we cooperate, why we build communities, and where our sense of morality actually comes from in the first place.
It's a pleasure to be here with you to discuss this. And you've hit on the central friction of this text immediately.
I try.
Because we aren't looking at a traditional philosophical treatise on ethics here. We are examining a deeply empirical, interdisciplinary argument.
Highly empirical.
Right.
Uh-huh.
It seeks to locate the genesis of human virtue, not in the realm of conscious moral reasoning, but within the strict, unforgiving calculus of evolutionary biology.
Unforgiving is the perfect word for it.
By the end of this deep dive, we're going to thoroughly interrogate how Ridley uses this framework, how he uses it to recontextualize everything from everyday social contracts to the overarching structure of civilization itself.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core tension presented right on the back cover of this YKY edition is incredibly stark.
Very stark.
It sets up a dichotomy that challenges you, the listener, directly. Like, are we fundamentally good entities?
Capable of altruism and cooperation.
Yeah, capable of complex societal building. Because we possess high-minded morals and an elevated conscious sense of right and wrong.
That's the traditional view.
Right. Or, alternatively, is all of this apparent virtue simply our biology operating under the surface?
It's a massive shift in perspective.
It really is. The text dares to ask if our goodness is just a biological imperative, like an evolutionary strategy masquerading as a moral choice.
Framing it as a strategy is the crucial pivot here. It completely strips away the romanticism we typically assign to human cooperation.
We do love to romanticize it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We generally prefer to view ourselves as autonomous agents, people who consciously elect to participate in a moral framework.
Because it feels good. It feels like we're in control.
Exactly. But this text suggests that what we interpret as a grand philosophical awakening or a deliberate ethical stance might actually be a deeply ingrained survival mechanism.
Just a mechanism.
Yes. It forces the reader to confront the possibility that altruism is simply an evolutionary adaptation, one optimized over millennia to ensure the propagation of our genetic material.
I hear that, and I know that's the premise, but it's a steep claim to make right out of the gate.
It is bold.
Yeah, reducing human altruism, whether that's, say, jumping into a river to save a stranger or dedicating one's life to a charitable cause.
Right.
Reducing that to a mere survival mechanism feels reductionist.
To a lot of people, yes.
To ground that kind of assertion, the text relies heavily on its intellectual lineage. And we see that immediately with the endorsement featured on the back cover.
And Dawkins' quote.
The Dawkins quote, exactly. From evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. He states, and I'm quoting here, "If there were a second volume of my book, The Selfish Gene dedicated to humans, I think a work similar to The Origins of Virtue would emerge."
That is a heavy-hitting endorsement.
It's a massive, incredibly specific endorsement.
What's fascinating here is the explicit tethering of Ridley's work to the gene-centric view of evolution.
Yeah, he's tying them right together.
Dawkins isn't just offering a casual blurb. He is actively positioning Erdemin Kokunleri as the logical continuation of his own paradigm.
The sequel, basically.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Assuming our listeners are well-versed in the core premise of the selfish gene.
Which is that genes drive behavior.
Right. That evolution is driven by the differential survival of replicating entities, namely genes, rather than individuals or species. Dawkins is signaling that Ridley applies this exact, uncompromising logic to the human sphere.
It's all about the genes.
It implies that to truly understand human virtue, we must abandon group selectionist thinking. We have to analyze behavior through the lens of genetic self-interest.
But applying that gene-centric logic to human virtue seems inherently paradoxical, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, if genes are relentlessly selfish replicators, as Dawkins established, how does Ridley justify the emergence of altruism and cooperation?
Ah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, it feels like the text is setting up a contradiction. He's essentially saying, I laid the groundwork for how selfish genes drive the natural world, and now Ridley is going to show you how those same selfish genes engineered human goodness.
It does sound like a paradox, which is precisely why the text is so compelling.
Yeah.
The argument isn't that humans are consciously selfish,
Right.
but rather that our genes have discovered, through the blind algorithmic process of natural selection, that cooperative behavior is often the most effective strategy for their own replication.
Okay, so the cooperation is the tool.
Exactly. Altruism, in this framework, isn't a defiance of genetic selfishness. It is its most sophisticated manifestation.
Wow.
Dawkins is warning the reader that Ridley will dissect human social behavior with the same cold, calculating precision used to analyze a colony of ants or bees.
A colony of Hymenoptera, right. Let's look at the specific questions the blurb promises to tackle using this framework, because they scale up quite aggressively.
They certainly do.
It starts with, why do people live in communities? Then it expands to, how did societies emerge?
The macro level.
Right, and finally, what is at the root of cooperation among humans? These aren't just biological questions. They border on sociology and political science.
They do. And that is the ambition of the evolutionary psychology approach.
Okay.
If we look at that first question, why people live in communities, the traditional sociological answer might point to shared cultural values.
Or agriculture, maybe.
Right, the mutual benefits of agricultural development. But the biological framework demands we look deeper into the Pleistocene environments where our hominid ancestors evolved.
Way back.
Way back. The text implies that the drive to form communities is not a cultural artifact, but a biological imperative encoded long before the first city was ever built.
Right, but how does the text bridge the gap between those small, kin-based bands of early hominids and the emergence of massive, complex societies?
That's the big leap.
It is, because kin selection explains why I might share resources with my siblings. We share a significant percentage of our genes. But it doesn't adequately explain why a modern human participates in a global economy, or why you or I pay taxes to support institutions that benefit complete strangers. That's a massive leap.
That leap is exactly what the book attempts to navigate. It suggests that the mechanisms originally evolved for kin selection and reciprocal altruism in small groups were essentially hijacked or extrapolated to function in larger societies.
I say.
The psychological architecture that makes us hypersensitive to reputation, fairness, and cheating.
Traits that were crucial for survival in a hunter-gatherer band.
Exactly. Those are the very same cognitive tools we use to navigate modern corporate structures or international relations today.
So it's the idea that we are running modern civilization on prehistoric hardware.
That is a brilliant way to put it. Prehistoric hardware.
Which brings us to the most provocative part of the back cover. Here's where it gets really interesting.
This is the crux of it.
The text poses a direct, almost uncomfortable question. Is the thing that directs us toward altruism and cooperation actually our minds or our conscience? Or is it a million-year-old genetic program?
That framing completely upends the traditional hierarchy of human cognition.
Completely.
For centuries, philosophical traditions have treated the conscience as the pinnacle of human achievement.
The thing that separates us from animals.
Precisely. The rational, deliberate override of our base animal instincts. Kantian ethics, for example, relies heavily on the conscious duty to act morally.
Duty and reason.
Yes. But by contrasting the conscience with a million-year-old genetic program, the text posits that our moral intuition isn't a product of elevated reasoning at all.
It's just software.
It's a legacy operating system.
I'll grant you the premise that our baseline cooperative instincts might be genetic, but dismissing the conscience entirely seems overly deterministic, doesn't it?
It pushes the boundaries, certainly.
Are we really supposed to believe that every act of complex moral reasoning, say drafting a constitution or establishing a system of universal human rights, is just the inevitable output of a genetic algorithm?
Well, the text pushes this even further with a very specific analogy.
Oh, the swallows.
The swallows. It asks, are we no different in this regard from swallows that follow the same migration route every year?
It's a great mental image for the listener. Comparing the instinct of a bird flying south for the winter to a human deciding to help a neighbor or pay their taxes?
This raises an important question about the illusion of agency.
Agency, yeah.
When we observe swallows undertaking a massive multi-generational migration, we recognize it as a breathtaking feat of biological programming.
We don't think they're reasoning it out.
We don't assume the lead swallow is consulting a map
Yeah.
or debating the optimal route based on weather patterns. The behavior is incredibly complex, yet entirely hardwired. The analogy challenges you to consider if human moral behavior, despite feeling incredibly deliberate and agonizingly reasoned from the inside, looks functionally identical to a swallow's migration from an evolutionary perspective.
But the mapping there feels flawed to me.
How so?
Swallows follow a highly predictable static route. Human cooperation is wildly dynamic.
Sure.
We betray each other, we form novel alliances, we build completely unprecedented social structures that have no historical equivalent.
Yes.
If we are just executing a genetic program, how does this framework account for the sheer variability and unpredictability of human societies? A swallow doesn't suddenly decide to establish a democratic republic of birds in the middle of its migration.
That's a valid critique. And it points to the complexity of the program Ridley is describing.
Okay, lay it on me.
The genetic program for human cooperation isn't a rigid script like a migration route. It's a highly flexible conditional algorithm. It's less always fly south, and more if you encounter a stranger, assess their reputation. If they cooperate, reciprocate. If they defect, punish.
Ah, so it reacts to the environment.
Exactly. The staggering complexity of human civilization isn't a refutation of the genetic program. It is the result of billions of these incredibly sophisticated conditional algorithms interacting in real time.
So you're arguing that the conscience, that internal voice telling us what is right and wrong, is essentially just the user interface for this complex genetic operating system.
The user interface, yes.
It gives us the feeling of making a moral choice, which ensures we execute the behavior, but the underlying drive is pure biological optimization.
Precisely. The feeling of moral righteousness or the sting of guilt are simply the psychological levers evolution uses to ensure we play the game optimally.
The levers.
Guilt prevents us from cheating when the long-term cost of being ostracized outweighs the short-term gain of defection.
Because being kicked out of the tribe meant death.
Exactly. And righteous indignation compels us to punish free riders, maintaining the integrity of the cooperative group. It feels like high philosophy, but it functions like a homeostatic mechanism.
It's a bleak way to look at a charitable donation, I'll admit.
It takes some getting used to.
To truly build a case for this level of biological determinism, Ridley can't just rely on evolutionary theory in a vacuum. And the Blurred explicitly points out that he doesn't.
No, he casts a very wide net.
According to the text, Ridley spans a very wide range of disciplines to synthesize his argument.
Yes.
The specific fields mentioned are anthropology and zoology on one side, and economics and game theory on the other.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the necessity of this multidisciplinary approach becomes obvious.
You can't just use one tool.
You cannot decode a conditional algorithm as complex as human societal interaction using only one set of tools. You need a framework that can handle both the deep historical context and the rigorous mathematical modeling of contemporary behavior.
Let's break down those tools, because combining anthropology and zoology makes intuitive sense for an evolutionary argument.
They are the foundation.
Right. Anthropology provides the fossil record, the evidence of how early hominid tribal structures functioned, the physical environments that selected for specific cooperative traits.
And zoology provides the comparative models.
Right. Looking at non-human species to identify the biological precursors to altruism without all the noise of human culture.
Exactly. Anthropology and zoology establish the physical and historical baseline. They tell us what the environmental pressures were and how related species responded to similar pressures.
Okay.
But where the synthesis becomes truly powerful is the integration of economics and game theory.
This is where I struggle slightly with the methodology.
It's a jump, I know.
Economics is traditionally the study of conscious resource allocation by rational actors, and game theory is the mathematical modeling of strategic interactions. How do you seamlessly integrate the conscious mathematical models of modern economics with the blind, millions of years old processes of evolutionary biology? It feels like mixing oil and water.
It requires translating the currencies.
Translating the currencies. Explain that.
In traditional economics, the currency is capital, or utility. In evolutionary biology, the currency is reproductive success. inclusive fitness.
Right, making more copies of your genes.
Game theory is the vital bridge between the two. When Ridley applies game theory, he isn't assuming that early humans were sitting around a campfire solving complex matrices.
No spreadsheets in the Pleistocene.
Exactly. He's using evolutionary game theory, which demonstrates how certain behavioral strategies, like tit for tat in an iterated prisoner's dilemma, can outcompete and eventually dominate a population of alternative strategies.
So in this framework, game theory isn't a description of conscious human strategy.
No.
It's a description of how natural selection optimizes behavior over time. The rational actor is just the gene itself, trying to maximize its returns.
That is the core translation. If a specific cooperative strategy, say, sharing meat after a successful hunt, yields a higher long-term genetic payoff than hoarding it, then the gene's coding for the psychological disposition to share will proliferate.
It's mathematically inevitable.
Economics and game theory provide the mathematical proof that these cooperative strategies are, in fact, evolutionarily stable. Zoology and anthropology provide the physical evidence that these strategies actually emerged in the real world.
It's a formidable synthesis. It really is.
It locks the argument in from both sides.
It essentially argues that human morality isn't a philosophical construct. It's a mathematically inevitable equilibrium point reached through the brutal trial and error of natural selection.
Brutal but effective.
Which perfectly sets up the final promise of the text. The blurb states that Ridley arrives at provocative answers that will create debate.
The provocation is inherent in the methodology we just outlined.
Yeah, people don't like being told they're just meat machines executing code.
To look at the vast, beautiful tapestry of human culture, ethics, and societal achievement, and argue that it is fundamentally underwritten by the selfish replication of genetic material is deeply unsettling to many.
It strikes at the heart of human exceptionalism.
It absolutely does.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, navigating this text? Why does the reduction of virtue to biology generate such fierce resistance?
And a very visceral reaction.
It seems to me that the discomfort stems from a perceived loss of moral accountability. Like, if my cooperation is dictated by a conditional algorithm optimized in the Pleistocene era, do I actually deserve credit for being a good person?
That is the philosophical friction at the heart of the debate. The fear is that biological determinism leads to moral nihilism.
If it's just biology, nothing matters.
Right. If virtue is just a survival tactic, does it lose its value? However, understanding the evolutionary roots of a behavior doesn't negate its current utility or its subjective reality.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, the fact that the feeling of love evolved to ensure parental investment doesn't make the subjective experience of love any less profound for the individual feeling it.
It still feels like love.
Exactly. The mechanism doesn't destroy the meaning.
But it does change how we view the macro structures of society.
Yes, on a systemic level, it changes everything.
If we accept Ridley's premise, as outlined in the YKY edition of Erdman, Cook, and Larry, then a functioning society isn't a triumph of collective moral reasoning.
No, it's not.
It's a fragile ecosystem maintained by a delicate balance of genetic self-interest and reciprocal altruism. It suggests that our social contracts are only as strong as the evolutionary imperatives backing them up.
And that perspective demands a deeply critical approach to how we design our modern institutions.
Because we have to design them for the humans we actually are.
Precisely. If we understand that human beings are hardwired to prioritize kin, to be hypersensitive to reputation, and to aggressively punish defectors, we have to build economic and political systems that align with those biological realities.
Instead of ignoring them.
Rather than utopian systems that assume a limitless, unconditional capacity for human goodness. Because that limitless goodness simply doesn't exist in our evolutionary code.
Which is an incredibly pragmatic, if somewhat unromantic, takeaway.
Very pragmatic.
It forces us to look at the mechanics of society rather than just the ideals.
It clears away the fog.
We've covered a massive amount of conceptual territory today, all stemming from the back cover of a single text.
Just the back cover, yes.
We started with the Turkish translation of Matt Ridley's work by Erhan Yusasoy, Erdman, Cook, and Larry, published by Yapı Kredi Yayınları, ISBN 978-975-08-1982-7.
A fantastic edition to track down if you want to dive deeper.
We explored the heavy implications of Dawkins' endorsement, treating human virtue as the sequel to the selfish gene.
We also critically examined the deeply unsettling analogy of the migrating swallows, debating the extent to which our moral intuitions are simply the user interface for a million-year-old genetic program.
Such a powerful image.
And we unpacked the formidable methodology required to make this argument, synthesizing the historical baseline of anthropology and zoology with the predictive mathematical modeling of economics and game theory.
It's a paradigm shift that recontextualizes the mundane. The next time you hold a door open for someone or collaborate on a project or feel that sharp pang of guilt for letting a friend down, you have to ask yourself,
Right.
are you exercising high moral reasoning, or are you seamlessly executing a perfectly optimized survival script?
I want to leave you with one final thought to consider as you navigate the complexities of your own social interactions.
Please do.
If our deepest virtues, our capacity for profound altruism, and our ability to build sprawling, cooperative civilizations are ultimately just mechanical survival strategies encoded in our DNA, does that actually diminish their value?
That's the big question.
Or does this suggest something even more profound? That goodness and cooperation aren't fragile philosophical ideals, but are literally the resilient, inescapable fabric of our biological existence.
That is a phenomenal question to sit with. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep examining the world, keep challenging your baseline assumptions, and we will talk to you next time.